All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. Thanks for everyone who's here as part of this webinar. Again, this is AmPhil Scotch Talk. My name is Doug Schneider. I'm a managing partner at the firm. I'm here with my colleagues, Aaron Brown, Sandy Schrader, and Ben Domain. We're going to be talking to you and with you and answering questions about all things major gifts. First things first, being that it is a Scotch talk, the idea with this is to be more informal, have a conversation. We don't know what direction this will go in based on the questions that we get, see how the conversations go, but we do want you to be a part of this. So if you have questions throughout the next hour or so, feel free to use the Q&A feature here as part of Zoom. Put in questions. I'm going to do my best to monitor the questions coming in. We'll field them as we're able. With that, we'll go ahead and I'll just do some brief introductions of the folks here and let them tell you about themselves and their backgrounds and what makes them qualified to talk to you about major gifts. We'll start with Aaron Brown, who's up in my upper right-hand corner, at least on my screen. Aaron is a managing consultant at our firm. He heads up our consulting division out of Atlanta. So does work in our southern area of the country. Comes to us before from the Foundation for Economic Education. And Aaron, tell us something about yourself and what you're drinking today on this call.
Sure. So this call, because it's 3 o'clock my time, I'm just drinking coffee this time. Okay. The later ones we do, I will actually have Scotch, but 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, I try to hit the coffee this time. That's right. I'm down here in the Atlanta area. I was born and raised in Georgia. And that's right. We're running the Southeast focus team down here. You're right. I ran the fundraising team at the Foundation for Economic Education for several years. And before that, I worked with several different policy and advocacy organizations in the DC Beltway, doing both grant writing, grant management, major gifts, strategy, kind of all the above. That's where I come from.
And you participate in the Scottish Highland Games and play rugby, which may be the most important thing about you, right?
That's right. That's right. Now that translates into fundraising by just the resilience and the persistency you need to get those gifts in the door. So
there you go. Okay, excellent. And then moving counterclockwise on my screen is Sandy Schrader. Sandy is also a managing consultant at our firm. Runs our capital campaign or is highly involved in our capital campaigns division. Sandy comes to us from higher education, where she's been involved with capital campaigns as large as $150 million campaigns, Fuller Seminary and elsewhere. So Sandy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As Doug said, I am part of our capital campaign group at AmPhil, and I have been in development for 23 years. The majority of that has been in the major gifts area, and as well as campaigns. So I've done quite a few campaigns. The most recent was at Fuller in that Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California, where I oversaw our full team. And we launched during COVID, probably like many of you, kept everything going during COVID, and we launched a $150 million campaign. And I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm actually calling today from St. Louis, Missouri, where I was born and raised.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Sandy. And last but not least is Ben Domain, who's coming to us from Denver. And previous to being here at our firm with Focus, a Catholic student ministry organization that works on campuses around the country, and of note, played for LSU on an SEC championship team. Do I have that right, Ben?
Correct. Yep.
All right.
Absolutely.
Fill in any gaps.
So you asked what qualifies me to do major gifts, and I would say playing football for LSU, because I bring that same strength and the passion and intensity towards our work, because I absolutely love major gifts. And I am drinking. I decided to keep it Southern today, so I did a little Jim Beam.
Okay, good.
So,
Good.
so leading that up. No, I'm super blessed to be a part of it today. Our conversation today. Worked for Focus for about 8 years. Transitioned to a small local nonprofit here called ACE Scholarships, providing for access for education for private schools for lower income families. So did that for a short time, and I got a phone call from someone who works at AmPhil and said, "Hey, we need some help to run the Denver office," and been a part of it. So about 1.5 years now. And really I cut my teeth in major gifts fundraising. So raising over millions of dollars for Focus. Also was, they did an analysis that I would close the most amount of planned gifts for Focus other than the vice president of development and the head of planned giving. So I love to kind of share that tidbit because I think that the most impactful fundraiser for planned giving is your major gift officer. And then also I had my MBA with a concentration in philanthropy from the University of Mary in North Dakota. So I run the Denver office and super blessed to be here. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, those of you who are on today's call, you're in for a treat. We have 3 very talented, experienced fundraisers doing major gifts. And one thing that it dawned on me is you have Aaron, who comes from the policy world. You have Sandy, who comes from higher education. You have Ben, who comes from kind of a faith-based background, ministry. So kind of runs the gamut, different types of organizations, which may prove useful. So if you think about your organization, where you're at, maybe some of the questions, you may want to even direct a particular question to one of them based on their background. Okay, we're going to jump into it here in a second. Sandy, I forgot to ask you, what are you drinking, if anything?
I have sparkling lemonade, and it's only 2 o'clock in my world. Okay, yeah. So I wasn't yet ready to add any additional alcoholic beverage to my lemonade yet. Maybe Great. By the time we're over this call, though.
Okay, we'll see. And if anybody's wondering, I'm drinking, this buble, as I like it, bubbly buble. Okay, here we go. All right, so major gifts. Why should nonprofits, those in fundraising, care about major gifts? Like, why major gifts? Why not just do direct mail? Why not just focus on foundation grants? Why are major gifts important from your perspectives and your experiences to fundraising? And I'm just going to let whoever wants to answer that first, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, love to hear your thoughts to get us going. Why major gifts matter, and why organizations should think about major gifts as part of their overall fundraising strategy.
Sure, I'll jump in from a campaign perspective. As we're looking at campaigns and we're working with organizations as we do feasibility studies and the pre-campaign work, what we look for is about 80% of the campaign goal coming from 20% of your donors. So I say that 80-20, I think more often than not, it ends up being 90-10. So as an organization, if you think about 10 to 20% of your donors making the majority or the majority of your incoming dollars in revenue, that's huge. And if you're not doing major gifts, if you're not working with individuals and asking them to increase their giving, then you really have a lot of work to do with direct mail and whatnot.
So actually, this is great because I'll build on that. This is something that Ben and I talk about quite a bit, not only in trainings that we run, but just discussing it all the time. And we have kind of a running joke that we do major gifts because that's where the money is. And it's true outside of campaigns as well. For most organizations, not all, but a vast majority of them, you are going to be a little top heavy on your major gifts. And that's fine, as long as it's not too top heavy, right? Most of your money is going to come from a smaller amount of donors who are making or giving you more generous support. To Doug, your point, you say direct mail, like we love direct mail. We see it as a great identifier of folks who can make major gifts. And occasionally, you might look out and find, get a large gift out of the mail. But I don't want to completely sweep that aside, because it is great for bringing those folks in. And I think we're going to talk about this a little more into your organization and your mission, and kind of moving them up into becoming a major donor. But I just want to throw that out there because Ben and I, like I said, we're fond of saying we do major gifts because that's where the money is. And for a vast majority of organizations, that's who does fund or should fund your mission.
Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, I think drawing off of Aaron, I think that allows your mission to scale, right? I think that's what I love so much about major gifts is, you have monthly giving, you have direct mail, and that's great. That allows you to sustain your mission, but the major gifts allow you to scale your mission, whether it's expansion or being more innovative in your programs. So that's why I love major gifts.
So let me ask you this: how would each of you define a major gift?
That is a really good question. And also something that Ben and I talk a lot about. So I do think this is different for each organization. So I want to throw that out there. I do think it's a case-by-case basis, but I also hate that answer. So I'm going to give you something of a baseline that we like to look at. Typically, when we look at major giving in very broad strokes, we're looking at $1,000 and up. And that's based on someone who has the capacity to give a $1,000 check in one fell swoop, in one go, is probably very likely in the upper echelons of their capacity to give more. They're probably well off. They're probably pretty involved. It also is a mark of someone who's pretty bought into your mission. $1,000, most of us, $1,000 in one stroke of a check is a pretty decent amount to be given to an organization, particularly as a first-time gift. Other organizations, you're going to define it differently. You're going to strategize around it differently. Most groups are not going to send a major gift officer to go meet in person with the $1,000 donors, but some might, especially if they have even higher capacity, and we know that through research. But that's the baseline I like to use, knowing that some groups are going to define it as higher and base their strategy around that number being a little bit higher.
And I think to codify what Aaron's saying there about $1,000, there was a study done by CNN, you can look it up, that only about 40% of Americans can cover an unforeseen emergency of up to $1,000, right? And so if you look at the way that which we give, we typically do emergency, necessity, a want, and then luxury, and then charitable giving. The charitable giving is like last on the totem pole. So when someone does write you a check for $1,000, they're signifying they have a tremendous amount of wealth. If you couple that with research from Blackbaud that said if someone writes you an unsolicited check, and when we say unsolicited, meaning non-face-to-face, the probability of them giving 10x of that gift in the next 18 months is actually high. So I have a client who had a gift come through for $5,000 unsolicited or $15,000 unsolicited. So their capacity is tremendous. They could easily ask for $25,000 their next gift and maybe get to that 150,000 by the third gift in the next 18 months. I typically also add to that, Doug, 3 layers. I look at what the donor defines as a major gift. You would never want to tell someone that their gift wasn't a major gift. I like to then look to the framework of what is the organization development department define as a major gift, because that's going to be a difference between $1,000 coming from the donor versus who are we going to send a major gift officer to visit with. I know of one organization, even if you're given $100,000 a year, it's not worth them to send their major gift development officer out to you, which is insane, right? And then because then you know how to craft individual action plans around that. And then the third layer I'd like to look at is, what is your board or your executive director and or your CEO look as a major gift? And the reason I like to define that one is at what level are they going to call their spouse or call the head of the board and say, oh my gosh, we just closed this gift? Because I think Aaron did a talk one time and said one of the things that is fraught in development is that we don't celebrate our wins enough. And so really, when you're able to communicate to leadership that you've closed a sizable gift that makes them excited, that should be permeating to the whole organization to say, hey, we're doing it. We're moving forward and we're actually advancing, right? We're developing and it's working. So I like to encourage development officers to celebrate their wins, especially with leadership. So,
Sandy, any thoughts? I mean, Aaron's talking about like kind of what is the kind of the indicator, right? That first level gift and what it might mean to get up to a 5 or 6 figure. Then you're thinking about even how you think about it internally, right, at a leadership level. Sandy, especially when you're doing some of those larger campaigns, big institutions, how did you think about a major gift? What's the
Yeah, I would second both of my colleagues. There is, depending on your organization and the size of your organization, as well as your annual budget, there is some flexibility, some movement in there. But I do think that, you know, at the $1,000 level, that is a significant gift, whether or not there is capacity for much more than that. So that's kind of when I believe that if it's not within the organization, if $1,000 is not yet considered a major gift, then there should at that point be some attention paid. And that's where things like donor clubs and different opportunities like that. So you begin to funnel those donors and give them a little bit more attention. But when I think of major gifts, I think of 5,000, 10,000, 25,000. And in my 23 years of development experience, I started and there was never a level of principal gifts. And now it is very normal within the university world and higher education for there to be what's called principal gifts. And those are those million and above. And so it does depend on your organization. And as both Ben and Aaron said, we have to celebrate all gifts and then determine within our organizations at what level is that major gift and extra special attention, and how do we do that?
Yeah, so we're like, whereas a startup, nonprofit, budget of 500,000, you might be looking at $1,000, $5,000 major gift versus when it's maybe in a growth phase, $5 million organization, maybe a $25,000, $50,000 gift. And then, if you're a massive, research institution, education, health, medical center, what have you, it might be, 6 figures or higher, even depending.
Yeah, very much so. Mm-hmm.
So you kind of touched on this. I see one question here. We'll get to Jack, your question in a minute, and I want to remind people to go ahead and put questions in. Let me ask this just based on some of the comments made. What would be your recommendations for identifying major donor prospect? And and where are some places that you can actually find them? And what would be your recommendation working with a client? Say they have a house file, they have a existing donor base. You're always looking for new prospects, of course, but walk me through how you identify major gift prospects in your work.
So I like to look at this as 3 different categories, and I prioritize them specifically in this order. The first one is exactly what you said, Doug, which is looking at your current house file. For almost every organization, your next major gift, your next major donor is very likely already in your house file. They're very likely already giving to you. And there's, again, this is maybe a little more case by case basis, but to give you at least kind of broad stroke baseline threshold that I like to look at is if someone's been giving to your organization pretty consistently over time, at least 2 or 3 years in a row, and they've been giving certainly $500 and up, maybe $250 and up, they're going to grab my attention, because that's an indicator that, similar to what I was saying about that $1,000 threshold. Okay, we're dealing with that. That's not, if that's in response to mail or something you gave online, that's not an insignificant amount of money. I'm going to want to do some research on them. So looking through your house file, finding those folks at that level is the first place I would look, because they've already shown that they're bought into your mission. And they at least have a basic understanding of what you're doing and believe in it. And especially if you have those folks who have given they've given more than once, ideally more than twice, and they're kind of right at that cusp of getting to the $1,000 mark. That's the first place I would look. The second place I would look would also be right outside your house file, which is lapsed donors. These are folks that have drifted away haven't given. Different groups will define it differently. At least 12 months. Sometimes we use 18 months, possibly 24 months, depending on your organization. But these are folks that were once a part of your house file. They were giving to you, maybe infrequently, maybe frequently. And for some reason or another, they haven't given in the past year to 2 years. That's the next place I would go. Start digging into who those folks are. Look at those $250, $500, anyone between 250 and 1,000 who were once donors but are no longer, and start cultivating them. That's the second bucket I would look into. And then the third one is the one that I think first comes to mind, but I kind of see as the lowest priority, is truly cold prospects. People donors who have not given to your organization before, but through research, and we can dig into what that looks like as well in practical terms. Through research, you find they have an affinity for the kind of work you do based on other organizations they're giving to, and they have capacity to make a major gift, just also based on different factors of wealth that we can identify, as well as gifts they're making to other maybe similar organizations, or maybe political candidates if you're in the policy arena. Those are kind of the three sources I like to think of, Doug, when I'm thinking of who do we go to next for a big gift.
Anything else, Sandy, Ben, you would add?
Yeah, I want to second Aaron's consistency. What I have seen is that those donors that give year after year, and they're usually not huge gifts. They may be, as Aaron said, $500 or 1,000. Those are donors that really truly love your mission, love the work that you're doing. And so taking names from your database, and it's actually fairly easy to do that now. You can take 100 or 200 or 500 names from your database of those consistent donors and do some wealth screening on them. And that can really help indicate who within your database you should prioritize and get to know better. But yeah, nothing drastically different than what Aaron has already articulated. But the majority of your opportunity is going to be within those known people that have already interacted with your organization.
Kerben, or
I do. I completely do. I think everybody looks for the next Warren Buffett of their mission, right? And they're always looking externally. And I think that person might actually reside in your house file, in your current CRM. The other thing that I would say too is I do think it's important to go outward, right? And I think you should whale hunt. Now when I say that you can feed a village when you whale hunt, but you can also starve to death. Right. And so what I do propose to my major gift officers that I train and support is put 3 major whales on your list that if you landed them, the organization would be so excited, even if they gave a $5,000 gift, whether it be their name or who they represent, to get in front of them. Right. And so when you're looking at who those whales should be, I kind of think through the giving formula. So the giving formula for us is someone's capacity times their generosity times emotional engagement. And you're there to really emotionally engage them in the organization. But that aside, looking for someone's capacity is incredibly high. And their affinity, do they support like-minded organizations that when you call them up to say, hey, I would love to share with you about this organization because I think it is right in line with what you're passionate about. At the very least, make an introduction. And I really encourage, when I first started, it was pretty funny. I had started for Focus and our research team, I said, who do I go visit with? And they said, do you know anybody who's Catholic? And I said, yeah. And they said, are they rich? Yeah. Okay, there you go. Right. So that was my big prospecting list right there. Right. And so I think it's important to not get soft, if you will, and to, live in your house file and cultivate those people, but also do look externally. So
real quickly, I'm going to get to some of the questions that are being posed here. Some of the clients with whom I've worked over the years, I say, like, let's look at longevity, let's look at frequency, and let's look at some threshold of highest past contribution, maybe $1,000, maybe it's 500, whatever. You like correlate those 3 things, right? Like frequency with longevity. Okay, they've been giving to us for 10 years and they've given us 20 gifts, and the highest past contribution was $1,000. Correlate, you see where those overlap in the Venn diagram. It's a really good place to hone in on, like, focus time and effort and resources. I'm going to get back to the longevity aspect in a second. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of complex and joint giving, kind of major gifts with some planned giving opportunities. But let's let me get to the questions here. First, I'm going to go to the one first in the chat, and then I'll get to Jackson, the Q&A. So there's a question here about pulling first-time gifts between 2020 and 2023. One of the folks here, Mandy, had done this, and they haven't given, again, what's the best way to reach out? And I guess thereuld be some qualification here, right? But someone gave between 2020, 2023, we presume that there's some qualification, some wealth, has been screened through iWave or Wealth Engine Donor Search. In this case, it's been iWave. What would you recommend if they haven't given that second gift, right? But you know that they have capacity. What would you recommend?
Do you mind if I jump here first?
Go for it, Ben. Yeah.
I think we did a study. I forgot who it was. I believe it was us that did a study where we called a bunch of nonprofit or called a bunch of donors and asked why they quit supporting. And what was interesting about the #1 response for lapsed donors was, oh, I didn't know I stopped. Right. So I think sometimes when we call those donors, we're assuming that they purposefully didn't send us a check in 2021 or 2022 when they just didn't realize that they thought, oh, I am supporting, am I not? So I think that's an easy one for you just to call and say, hey, thank you so much for your past support. You don't have to draw attention that it was to 3 years ago, because chances are they think they're still supporting. So that'd be my first.
Yeah. I think that's true. I've run into that personally, just anecdotally. I've bumped into that several times where reach out and they're like, oh yeah, I kind of started putting the pieces together halfway through the conversation that, oh, they think they don't realize they haven't actually written the check the past 3 years, which made for interesting conversation. But I agree. I think something I like to do, particularly for folks 2 years and more out, I like to frame it like you said, Ben. I like to frame it as a thanks so much for your past support. But my excuse for kind of making that call and making it less random is to say, I'd love to give you an update on what we're working on. I want to kind of pull back the curtain for you and talk through the impact that we've been having, that your support has been having over the past couple of years. And I want to walk you through kind of what our strategy looks like this year, or maybe, and maybe for the next year as well. I think I like that because, one, it gives you more of an excuse, which is probably the best way to put it, to call them. So it's not, I think a thank you is great, but it's not just a random thank you. I like to do it because it makes them feel like they're getting kind of a behind the scenes look at what you're doing. And it also, it answers, or it fulfills something that I've run into a lot, and I encourage everyone who's doing major gifts to do, which is, don't assume that they've read everything, if not anything, that you've put in front of them, even over the past couple of years. So even if you've been doing consistent outreach to them through the mail or maybe through email over the past few years, send more personal email, do the phone call if you have the number, switch it up, rotate through those, be consistent, be persistent. Unless they say, no, absolutely, leave me alone, I don't want to hear from you anymore. Keep trying, because I think making the assumption again that, well, I've mailed them 4 different things and I sent them 2 emails. They may not have seen any of it, or they may have seen it once and then got busy. Or maybe they did open the annual report you sent, but they thumbed through it and they're not really as up to speed as you might assume they are on what you're doing. And that's why I think, to your point, Ben, sending the personal emails, doing the calls, kind of rotating through those until you get in touch or get told otherwise, I think is the way to do it. And I like that context of the update, because it doesn't touch on, hey, where the heck did you go over the past 3 years? Why did you drop off the face of the earth? Why did you stop giving? It treats them as a supporter, and they are a supporter, even if they are lapsed. I think doing that update and kind of bridging the conversation that way is the way I like to do it.
So let me ask this. I'm going to keep going with some of these other questions, and if all 3 of you want to answer everyone, awesome. But we could kind of maybe go quickly here on some of these. One question. This was first one that was posed. If someone if a donor's offended, because this happens, right? We're human beings, something goes sideways, maybe an expectation's not met or whatever. Okay. Have any of you have had an experience with a donor where it went south, the donor has soured on the organization, but you've been able to win them back? Is there an example that's illustrative in
yeah, absolutely. It happens. And even in reference to the last question on lapsed donors, sometimes they're lapsed because they're upset or because there was a misstep. And that misstep could be that they were taken off of a direct mail list, or their emails have gone into their spam folders. All of that to say, we don't know that until we actually pick up the phone and call them, or we actually get them, to respond to an email. So I have had, I'm over the years, I'm at least a dozen or so donors that I have called and said, I know that there's that you have concerns or that you're upset with our organization. Rather than talk to you on the phone, would it be possible to get together and have a conversation about this? And those are not always the most comfortable conversations to have, and they don't always go quickly. But if you will sit with your donor and listen to what the problem potentially is, and it is a problem to them, it may not be a problem with your organization, but the response has to be, they are always right. And so finding a solution and having that donor help you come up with what the solution would be. What would make them feel better about your organization? What is it that we did to offend you? Those sorts of questions are really great lead-ins. And I would say, if I've done this a dozen times, 11 out of 12, just by sitting with that donor and listening to his or her concerns, and then going back, making right whatever we did wrong as an organization to the best of our ability, it turns that donor around. I've had $1 million gifts come after a relationship has been soured, and simply because I took the time to sit with them and listen to what their concerns were, or to fix what we had done wrong in their minds.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, picking up what I heard there is you take action and actually probably err on the side of picking up the phone and not relying on.
Well,
right.
Yeah. And we have to remember, we're talking about major gifts. And so if these are major donors, if they truly are major gifts, we should be in relationship with them. So we shouldn't be afraid to talk with them. That's part of the relationship, to sit down and say, how are you doing? And to know, oh, wow, we've done something that has offended you or something that has soured this. So let's figure out if there's a solution that we can make it right.
Yeah, Doug, can I add to that real quick? Yeah. I'll spare the details on my story, but I had a similar situation. It's interesting in the policy world because the things you work on, people have very strong opinions about and can sometimes nitpick and split hairs and get very, very, they know what they think about certain policies and directions. So I had a donor, similarly, we had taken a more nuanced stance on something, and she was not very happy about it. But to your point, Sandy, it was like, okay, this is not a conversation I'm going to have over email. This is something where we need to pick up the phone. And I was relatively new at the time, so I didn't have any relationship with her. In fact, yeah, it was kind of a frustrated, angry email from her. So, but it was a great opportunity to have that call and hear her thoughts and understand. And it came clear to me, and I know this is just a sample size of one, but she wasn't really frustrated with us as an organization at the end of the day, or even our stance on that. She was just, I think she was frustrated at the state of the country. She saw us as something that was supposed to be a solution to that. And here we were, 9 times out of 10 on the right side of things. But for this one thing, it was just she couldn't stomach that we had taken this stance on it. But the biggest thing I learned from it was, and you were touching on this, Cindy, was the empathy and just like listening. asking questions, but really listening on what their concerns are. And, you know, I understand, because I've seen this too. You're not going to shift the entire mission of your organization for one donor who's upset. You're not going to move heaven and earth for that. But I do think that there are, in this situation, there are things that at the heart of the problem is not actually your stance or organization. It's how it was communicated, and the optics and the way it came across. And I actually, at least in my experience, I think, 9 times out of 10, that's actually what the problem was. It was a misunderstanding or something like that. For the ones that aren't a misunderstanding, you know, I think every organization just has their threshold, but on what you're going to change and what you're not. But at the end of the day, regardless, I agree with you, Sandy. You got to have that conversation. You got to hear from them.
All right, we have some good questions here. I'm going to get to the 3 that I see right now. I'm going to start with the one that just came in, though, because the comment is basically, you know, what do you do when you, in that conversation, realize the donor may not be right and they may not be a good fit for your organization. Mm-hmm. Right. And I have seen myself where the tail wags the dog, as they say, and, you know, you start chasing and going down a certain path because there's a number of zeros behind a certain gift, and then you're like off mission, et cetera. So what would your advice be if you realize, like, oh, okay, you may not be aligned?
Yeah, absolutely. And that does happen. And sometimes, you know, sometimes it is after you have had a relationship with that donor. I always think of the phrase bless and release. So bless them by listening to what their concerns are. Bless them by hearing them, even repeating back, hey, this is what I hear from you. These are the issues, the problems, and whatnot. But truly, you're not going to change the organization for this individual. And so there are times when it is appropriate to bless them and say, thank you so much for all that you've done for our organization in the past. And I hope that at some point in the future, we can bring you back in the fold. But for right now, I do think it's better that we part ways. I mean, it's kind of like breaking up. Sometimes you have to do that. And so we do have to do that. We have to keep our organization and the strength of your organization, the vision, the mission, and the impact that they have. You want to keep that strong. And so sometimes you have to say goodbye to some of your donors. That should be rare.
Yeah, we had an issue like that when I was with Focus. A very large individual gave us a grant to expand into California. At the same time, we couldn't go anywhere in California. We wouldn't go to any campus where both the priest and the bishop of that diocese allowed us to work in that diocese. And it just so happened that year that when he gave us 150 or 300,000, that the bishops weren't quite ready to say yes. So we deferred to go to the next year, and it was a little too soon for them. And the donor got so angry that we didn't expand into California. Right. I think this kind of carries into what Courtney asked earlier. So I'm going to kind of do 2 questions, if you don't mind, Doug.
Yeah, that's great.
I think this is a great time as the development director to get leadership involved. Because you know what, frankly, sometimes they just won't hear from me. I'm just the development director. I'm the head, or even the VP of development, or whatever. Right. And so that's why I really love if you could get, you know, one step above you, whether it be the CEO involved or the president, or even the board chair involved, right? I think one thing, missed opportunity in that, is that we could have had the board chair, who's highly respected, call and set up a meeting with that donor and say, hey, this is the way that the cookie crumbled, if you will, right? This is what happened. And frankly, we wouldn't have lost that donor. So I think that was kind of a short sight on our, you know, a big mess up on our end. And then to kind of tackle your question from earlier, Courtney, I think this is how do you get the head of an organization involved in fundraising? You know, we work with I think what the head of an organization is thinking is their bandwidth. Their bandwidth is so limited that they kind of have to control it, right? And they worry about getting it their bandwidth, working 160 hours a week kind of thing. I think help them by see the numbers that are lost. So we work with a client. I have a client right now. They have 100,000 donors. They're raising about $4 million a year. Their largest donation was $4,000. because they're only doing direct mail. So going back to your question, why major gifts? If 21% of, so what we see at AmPhil, on average of our clients, 21% of donors are giving $1,000 or more, or 8% of their donors giving 5,000 or more. That's somewhere between 21 million to 40 million. And this client's only raising 4. So I would run kind of your development operations through that lens, right? If you did 21% of your donor base giving 1,000 or 8% of your donor base given 5,000, what that number is, and share that with your executive director or your head of your organization. And then to know that the second question would be, oh, well, I would love to do more, but what's my bandwidth? And allow the head of the organization to say, or show them that you're not going to pull from them entirely. It's going to be the top 10 donors you need them involved with, or top 20, or maybe special cases of, hey, this donor's trying to be a bull in a china shop, but I really need you a one-off, right? And maybe get them to commit to something like 3 to 5 development visits a month, right? That you could fill up their time with, right? So something small, but not in but nothing, something that's very pivotal for them, something they can't manageable, but huge for organizations. So I'm kind of tackled 2 questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was going to get to that in a second.
To build on what you're talking about, Ben, something I learned when trying to bring leadership more into development, there are 2 key things that I learned. One is that you have to be very, I found it more effective to be very intentional in what you're asking of them. So rather than putting it out there as more of a broad statement of, I want you to be more involved in development, tell them very specifically how they can be more involved in development, how it's going to be helpful to you, and lay out why that reason is. And in very practical terms, what I mean. So I saw this more with a board, but also with executive leadership saying, hey, I've got 3 donors that it would be very meaningful for them to meet with the president, for you to lay out our strategy, our impact, and for them to feel like, not just feel like, but genuinely build a relationship with you. That's very different from saying, I want you to meet with donors, right? So it takes the burden off of them to put their brain power, their time you're talking about, Ben, into that. You're taking all that off the plate, and you're telling them specifically what would be the most useful. The other thing I learned is tied into that relationship is making sure you're treating development, particularly when you talk about it around leadership and interact about it with leadership, as relationships, and not just donors as piggy banks and wallets, but as someone who has a relationship with the organization, is bought into the mission, and that a relationship with the president or whoever it makes the most sense on executive staff to have, is going to play into that cultivation and keeping them around longer and moving them up into greater levels of giving. What I've seen occasionally is this idea of, oh, well, you're the major gift officer, you go raise the money. And from a strictly like take and give standpoint, sure, that might work. But in most of our lines of work, that's not going to fly at the end of the day. Fundraising is built on relationships. So those are 2 things I kind of learned. And I think that intentionality of what you're asking of leadership helps them get over that hurdle of, you want something from me, but I don't know what it is, or I have an idea what it is, but I don't know how to tackle it. And then also just being strategic in who you're building relationships with them.
Yeah.
Sorry, Doug.
No, so I'm just saying, like, so specificity, right? The focus aspect with combining with what Ben had just said of also showing them the potential, like showing them what the outcome might be. Right. So focus, deliberate. Yeah. Right.
And also it sounds super basic, but I think we're kind of dancing around it, is telling them that them being involved in fundraising is going to lead to those results. Like, you want to raise more money, the president building relationships with major donors is going to lead to greater results. And tying it straight into, hey, this is how we grow the organization. It's saying those words.
Might I add one more thing, Doug, that Aaron just jarred my memory. And when you do get the president and the CEO or whomever involved, make it easy for them to have meetings, right? So I would say get a visit plan together before you go meet with said big donor, big fish, right? So like, say, like, I would encourage you to type it up, like make the whole experience for them pleasurable, right? Because once they meet with the donor and it goes well, they're going to say, hey, that was awesome.
Give me more.
Yeah, give me more. Then and so what you can do there is to make it easy on them by specifying who the donor you're meeting with, what time it's going to be, where you're meeting, the history of the donor's giving history, what you're going to be chatting about, what you hope to ask for, and what their talking points are. So that way, before the donor visit, whether it be on the flight or the night before, they can read over and consider how they're going to play into the conversation. And that way they don't have to rethink and retool, right? And so once you make it easy for them and you get that one win, it's going to just kind of turn into the, what do you call that? The
snowball.
Yeah, churning it out. So anyways.
Okay, got a couple more questions here. I am going to get back to that longevity thing in complex gifts, so I haven't forgotten. But okay, John is asking voicemail, email, text, letter. What's your preference? And does it vary maybe based on age of the donor? But do you have a personal preference?
I mean, there's a use for all and a purpose for all. So part of it is, what's within your organization. How is that communication? How has that been? And then as you get into relationship with that donor, so whether it's your pipeline has identified them through direct mail and through email, then it's up to you in working with that donor to say, how would you like me to contact you? What works best for you? But there's nothing that I would stay away from. Rather, I want to, if I really want to visit with the donor, if I really want to ask him or her for a gift, I'm going to reach out to him in the way that works best for that particular donor.
I agree. I think it's a full arsenal. I am all for leaving voicemails. If you don't get them on the phone, I think leave a voicemail, identifying yourself, letting them know why you're calling real briefly. It gives you an excuse to call back. It puts it in their court for a little while. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to call you back. But yeah, I think my personal preference, I think everyone has their own style, is I tend to lead with email. I'll try that first and then do phones as follow-up. I don't know if there's technically a right order. I think it just depends on what feels good for you and the kind of donors you have. The one thing that I think we're all observing right now as we see this new kind of generation of donors is texting. And that's one that I think my personal take on it is I would get their permission first before texting them. Hey, are you okay with texting? Something like that. But I am seeing it more and more. Donors, even older donors, being much more open to texting as well.
Ben,
I would say the only thing I'd add to that, and I'd agree. I do a drip, right? So I do email, phone call, voicemail, text, right? And I just kind of cycle that over. I think what's lost in here is what you have to remember when you're reaching out to a donor, you're 5 to 7 of the top things that he wants to get back to in that day, right? Number 1 is something for his wife. Number 2 is for his boss. 3 is for something for his kids. And you're just not making the top 5. And that's not a mean thing. So what that alludes to is that to stay persistent and joyful every time you call, right? So I think something like, we know in marketing, it's like the power of 7. You need to reach out to someone 7 times before you can get in front of them, or whether you ask them for a gift, it takes 7 times to kind of present that gift to them. I think data is showing something that's more like 9 now, 9 touches, because they're inundated by social media and their email inbox is flooded, that you might have to reach out to them about 9 times. And I'm even seeing higher than that with certain studies. So just stay persistent and call them, so long as you maintain a joyful attitude.
All right, I'm going to add my 2 cents. It's my prerogative as the facilitator. No one really cares, wants to hear me, but I do have a thought on this. And I actually think, here's what I'd say. When in doubt, pick up the phone. And I say that because I think there's a reluctance, and email's easier.
Yeah.
And I'm not against email. I think there's a time and place for it, but I've seen, especially, and the context here is John's a 64-year-old getting retired. He's retiring in the major gift. So he's moving from industry into ministry. But what I have found among I have enough white hair here that I can talk about this, but the younger generation oftentimes defaults to email to a fault. And I think phone calls are rarer. And I'm not talking about spamming, but like phone calls are rarer. So actually, when you're making like leaving a genuine voicemail with someone, it actually means something. So, all right, that's all.
No, I agree. I agree, Doug. It
that.
makes you stand out more. I think leading with the email is fine, but you have to make the phone call at some point because it's much less crowded and you'll stand out as the people amongst the people reaching out to them.
We talk about phone call reluctance a lot. And I think to overcome that, I tell my major gift officers, the first thing you do in the morning is to make 10 phone calls. So eat the frog and just do it. And then when I say phone calls, I mean phone calls, not emails, right? Because I like what you said there, Doug, is just there's a reluctance to it and never call. So
yeah. Okay. We got 9 minutes. We're gonna pack a lot in this final 9 minutes. So here we go. Question about just like verbiage and language and vernacular, using the word changing donors to partners. Just quick thoughts. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, we're saying donor a lot. I use that internally. I like to say supporter, things like that. I think it's a personal take. I don't think there's like some like harm in saying donors, but I do like using the word supporter, maybe partner, depending on what kind of organization it is, better. Just personal preference externally.
Any other thoughts? Sandy?
I would say the more, variety of words that you use, some people are going to prefer, but to get away from the transactional side of it, I do think we have to step away from donor and using only donor throughout everything we do.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the drip campaign, trying to like time intervals, trying to get to a donor that's not responding? I mean, this is always something you send a letter and then you have the follow-up phone call and you leave the message. And then it's like, do I call 5 days later, 2 weeks later? Like, what do you have thoughts on trying to get that meeting or you reach out to that major donor prospect?
I'd say 3 business days. That was kind of what hit me originally, right? Like if you called them or emailed them and it's been about or it depends what motive. Like if I call them and I hadn't heard from them, I'd say 3 to 4 business days, maybe 5, right? So essentially a week. Yeah. And I think you're fine.
Yeah,
so.
I would add that those phone calls and voicemails create a bit of urgency in that. Obviously, if you're traveling and you're in the city, you can say, these are the days that I'm available. I'd really love to get together with you. If they are people in your hometown, you can't really use that tactic, but you can say, I really have some time at the end of the week. I'd love to hear back from you and maybe we can get together. And so the easier, I always think of it as, how can I make this easy? What's the easiest thing that I can do for this donor? Give them 2 dates and say, if that doesn't work, we can follow up from there. But and they may say, no, it doesn't work. And that's okay, because at least now you have a dialogue going on with them.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I have a question about complex gifts, because we're talking about major gifts, like getting that one ask, whether it's 10,000, 25,000, 100,000, whatever it is. But there's also an element of like even sometimes more substantial gifts, right? When you take, and this isn't a plan giving seminar, but like when you think about estate giving and legacy gifts. And so Sandy, maybe I'll just ask this of you only, and the others can jump in, but I know because you've done the campaign, like raising $150 million is a lot of money to raise. Maybe just like, what are your thoughts on like complex gifts and like, cash with something else?
Yeah. I think there's lots of opportunity, especially as we're looking at baby boomers entering into their retirement age. So that idea of incorporating a planned giving component into a gift is actually huge, or into an ask. So specifically within the campaign arena, and this can work for your organization, whether you're doing a campaign or not, I really like to converse with potential donors about them making a commitment for a multi-year annual gift. So in general, that's a unrestricted gift to your organization. Maybe it's $1,000 per year or $5,000, whatever they've typically been giving. Will they make a commitment to do that for the next 3 years, continue that gift? And then within a campaign, or even without, if there is a special project that you would like them to consider, asking them to make a special project gift. So now you've asked them for two things, annual as well as special project. And then if they're 65, 70, and above, the opportunity to say, and would you or have you considered putting the organization within your estate plans? That way it's what I've always called it as a three-prong ask. You're asking them for three gifts in one, and that really can maximize not only the size of their gift, but the longevity and the legacy of their gifts moving forward.
I hope everyone just took a ton of notes on what you just said. I think it's like super powerful. And I think the organization, individual gift officers and organizations that learn how to do that well, like really see their fundraising just like go through the roof.
Absolutely. And I just saw, I think it was Donna that popped up asking for a qualified gift. So the with IRAs and with the Secure Act 2.0 there and beyond that, donors can make a qualified gift up to $100,000 from their IRA accounts rather than taking their required minimum distributions. And so there are many opportunities for people that have put lots of money into their retirement funds for those to go directly to charity and therefore avoid the capital gains or income tax or whatnot that would go on that. So it is, and I don't want to turn this into a planned giving talk, but there are many opportunities with planned gifts and with our older donors for them to be generous, not only in their lifetime, but beyond that.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes.
There's a master class for that. Luckily, there's a master class on planned giving later that we put in the channel.
That's right. So, okay. So here's what I'll do. I know there's a couple other questions. Anyone that we didn't get to your question, Jim, I see yours. I'm gonna just email me or email us. My email is doug@amphil.com. So if there's a question that we address, we'll take it offline. We'll address it. What I want to hear from Sandy, Aaron, and Ben, just real quickly, is there, in your experience, in your fundraising out, asking for money, raising gifts, what has there been like a memorable experience either has been just a success that you've been able to like learn from and share with others, or a significant challenge that you now, and yeah, this can be, keep it brief, but I'm just curious if there's something that stands out that was like that moment that now you're helping teach others from that moment.
Yeah. I know mine, and it was when I had just started Major Gifts. I've been working on grants and behind the scenes and all that, and it was that light bulb moment of, oh, donors want to be asked. They want to be asked. They're plugged into your mission. They believe in what you're doing, and they want the courtesy of being asked. The brief story is, I'd inherited a donor account. They were giving 6 figures to the organization I was at, and I had actually been told by people who have been there much longer than I had that, oh, no, don't worry about it. He'll send the check in December. It'll be fine. You can just thank him after that. Well, the check didn't come in December. And of course, I started getting panicky, and I did what I should have done all along, but lesson learned as a young MGO. I gave him a call, picking up the phone like we've been talking about. And I said, hey, I just wanted to, I used my whole, like, I want to give you an update. I wanted to see how things were going, see how the family was doing after Christmas and everything. And I eventually got around to, I don't know how I phrased it, but basically to the tune of, we didn't get your check, And he basically told me, he said, y'all never asked me. You never actually asked me for my continued support. And this has been a guy who had been giving for 11 or 12 years at this point, at like I said, 6-figure levels. And that was, now very graciously, he did cut the check, and forever after that, I of course paid. But that was my light bulb moment of like, oh, you have to make the ask. Don't assume donors want to be asked.
Sandy.
Yeah, this was several years ago. I was working with the donor. He and his wife really wanted to make a bigger gift. So it was campaign mode, and they said, we just wish we could make a bigger gift, but we just don't have the ability to do that, and on and on. So we had multiple conversations, and the gentleman and I our way of getting together, we always went for a run. So we were out one morning, six mile run, and then we were meeting his wife for breakfast. And so we were chatting during our run. And I said, you know, well, we already have this for your multi-year annual gift. You have made this modest gift to the campaign for a campaign project. And I said, you know what? You could actually make a planned gift and include your estate. And he stopped, dead stop in the middle of our run. And he said, oh my gosh, you mean I can be in that gift level? I can make a gift like that? And I'm like, well, yes, like you're old enough. He was over 60 and whatever our qualifications were at that point in time. And he ran even faster. So I'm just so out of breath by the time we got to breakfast. And the first thing he said when we sat down to breakfast was, oh my gosh, honey, we get to be like all of those other people, our peers, and we're going to make a gift of X number of dollars. And he was so excited. I got so many thank you notes after that. And I got one of the best runs I've ever gotten with a donor. So it was a win-win for us all.
All right, Ben, real quick, we're 1 minute over, but it's okay. We want to hear from you.
I set up a visit with a donor in Houston. He was the CEO of one of the largest publicly traded oil field companies in the nation. And I was ecstatic. It was my second or third month on the job. And I go with one of my, a senior director of development, and we go in to visit with him. And right before we asked him for $75,000, I got so nervous. It was really hard to set up the meeting. I interrupted him to talk about fishing because he likes to fish. And we could never get back in front of him. And I just killed myself to this day that I interrupted $75,000. So that is to say, if a donor is hard to get in front of, make it worth your time. There's a reason it's hard to get in front of them, right? So you want to show them that you're not there to, I see this a lot with people like, I want to build relationship for a long time. He may not want to build relationship, but he just doesn't have that much time to build relationship. So if you get a visit with a donor, go ahead and ask if it's hard to get in front of.
Good. All right, 2 quick announcements for those of you who are still on. We have 2 upcoming events. We have a Givers, Doers, Thinkers webinar on charitable tax deductions, March 29th. And then we have an Elements of Grant Writing Masterclass on April 13th. So you can mark your calendars, register. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Great questions, good conversation. This is recorded, so we'll make sure you guys get this information, I think. Hopefully that's correct. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes,
It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.